Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Black Pastel ball pythons. And if you've been into ball pythons, kind of shopping around, looking at the different morphs, you probably heard of the pastel. And the pastel is a yellow snake. Sometimes it's a bright yellow, sometimes it's not quite as bright. And let me tell you, the Black Pastel is definitely not a yellow snake. As a matter of fact, if you went up to a reptile show, looked at a Black Pastel in a display case, not only would it look similar to a normal, but you wouldn't realize the incredible potential of the Black Pastel when mixed with other genes. I'd say it's probably one of the best sleeper morphs. As a standalone morph, you really can't tell that it's that impressive. I'd say similar to the yellow belly. The yellow belly by itself isn't really that impressive, but you start mixing it with other combos and it really has a dramatic effect mixed with other genes. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you the potential of the Black Pastel when mixed with some of these other genes. Alright, so I'm going to start over here on the world of ball pythons, and this is what a Black Pastel looks like. As a matter of fact, I actually have 4 normal female breeders in my ball python breeding operation, and one of them looks really close to the Black Pastel. It almost looks exactly like this snake. It's kind of interesting. And if you actually scroll through some of these examples, I would say you notice some little differences compared to a normal. You have a little bit of white coming up the belly. Sometimes you see some of the patterns on the side kind of merging together. And let me tell you, if I actually had a Black Pastel in my collection, I would definitely know from the results of the offspring of the pairing. And let me tell you, I definitely don't have Black Pastel. You would definitely know, as soon as you bred it to something, you would definitely know. And you can see on some of these, it's a lot more dramatic than others. Some almost look normal-like, and then some of them look, you can definitely tell that something's going on with this snake here. So if you actually breed 2 Black Pastels together, you get a super Black Pastel. And the super is actually interesting. It is probably as black as you can get in a ball python. It's a completely black snake, no color or pattern at all. And there's a couple interesting things about the Super Black Pastel. Probably number 1 is it tends to have a duck bill, which is probably the biggest downside of working with the Super Black Pastel. I know if you're looking for Panda Pines, which is the completely black and white pied, you know, probably one of the biggest downsides. A lot of people don't get into the project because a lot of times you'll have a tendency to have the duck bill, which is kind of a flattened out mouth. It almost looks like a duck, a little bit flattened out and a little bit wider. Doesn't really affect the snake as far as the health. It just looks a little bit odd. And then the other thing with the Super Black Pastel, some people have reported in larger collections that they've been kind of noticing that the Super Black Pastel has a little bit more of an attitude compared to some snakes. It's a little bit more snippy, a little bit more bitey than a lot of your standard morphs, which is, it's always kind of interesting, especially in a large scale, how you can really notice certain characteristics kind of pop out compared to the rest of your other snakes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go over here and show you pretty much the Black Pastel mixed with some of the most common genes, so you can see the dramatic impact of the Black Pastel when mixed with some of these morphs. So this is actually the butter, essentially the same thing as a lesser. I actually have 2 lessers in my collection as females. I try to breed them every year. Actually, it seems like they kind of leapfrog every other year. Seems like one is ready and then the other one's taking a year off because it doesn't get back on food in time for the next year. But this is what happens when you mix the Black Pastel with the butter. You get a pretty impressive snake. I'd say it's pretty unexpected, I would say, as far as mixing the 2 genes together. And you get a really dark, high contrast snake. And I would say, as far as trying to work stuff into a dark morph, I would say this has probably the best potential that I've ever seen in any other morph, working it into some of the dark stuff. So the albino is, I would say the albino is kind of a weird anomaly when it comes to Black Pastel. When you mix albino with Black Pastel, actually if you first look at just some of the albinos, you see some of them are kind of a high contrast, some of them are kind of a low contrast. And the interesting thing is when you work in Black Pastel, you actually get a reduction of the yellow, and it kind of gives you kind of a high white albino, and it really increases the intensity and the contrast of the snake. I really like Black Pastel and Albino. You always think, you know, Black Pastel is a dark morph. You'd think actually if you work it into Albino, you get something a little bit darker, and it's like complete opposite, where you actually get more white and even a more intense white. I would say it's one of the anomalies of the gene. And the other interesting thing is if you actually take the super Black Pastel, mix it with the albino. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking a black snake and you're mixing it with a snake that's white and yellow. This is what you get. This is totally unexpected too. This is the albino super Black Pastel. Come to find out, it's a completely white snake with red eyes. I would have never guessed the combination of those two genes would produce a snake like this. So the yellow belly, I would say yellow belly is kind of another one of your sleeper genes. Doesn't really look that impressive by itself. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people that are hard pressed trying to identify yellow belly from other morphs. It's really similar to like if you did yellow belly gravel or yellow belly asphalt in the highway or freeway projects. Sometimes it's almost impossible to tell the two apart because they're so really subtle genes. You mix that with the Black Pastel and take a look at this. This is one of the craziest combos that I've ever seen. Really unexpected, the yellow belly Black Pastel. So cinnamon is also kind of an interesting mix. When you mix it with Black Pastel, it's actually allelic. You get an allelic combo. So you mix the two together and it almost acts like the super Black Pastel. It has an almost completely black snake. You actually breed this to something else. Half the babies will come out cinnamon, half will come out Black Pastel, acting like a super, which is kind of interesting. So the Leopard is really interesting too. So the Leopard is pretty much the king of combos in my opinion. If you actually look through all the different combinations with the Leopard, I'd say it mixes well with just about anything. So you're crossing here, you're crossing the king of combos with the dark king of combos, mixing the two together. And this is what you get. You get one of the most impressive snakes that I've ever seen. This is the Black Pastel Leopard. Probably one of the best dark combos that I've ever seen. So the GHI is another interesting thing. When you actually mix GHI with Black Pastel, I would say it's very similar to the GHI Mojave. The GHI Mojave is essentially almost a completely black snake. It's a really dark snake with almost the fluorescent line or a fluorescent dotted line coming down the back. You mix the two together and you almost get what looks like a GHI Mojave, except the Black Pastel doesn't give it quite of an intense black on the sides as you would see in the GHI Mojave. I thought that was kind of an interesting combo, how it just kind of mixes together. This one almost looks like a GHI Mojave right here, which is kind of interesting. So the clown is kind of interesting. The clown, I'd say, is probably one of the best recessive morphs when it comes to combos. It works really well. As a matter of fact, I'm leaning more towards clown in my collection. I think it's hands down probably one of the best genes out there. The thing I really like about clown is all my clowns tend to eat really well compared to a lot of the other snakes. Talk about personalities in certain lines or certain genes. I'd say clown, if you're into ball pythons, you're worried about your clown not eating or your ball python not eating, you could definitely get into the clowns or the bamboos or the desert ghosts. It seems like all those are really aggressive feeders. You mix the clown with Black Pastel and take a look at this. This has got to be hands down one of my favorite combos with the clown and the Black Pastel. It makes it really dark up on top, brings the light up the bellies, the white, and it keeps a really high contrast. You know, you start layering stuff on top of this, I can imagine just what you could do with the Black Pastel, the clown, and then some other like brightening genes on top of it, like if you did Orange Dream or Yellow Belly or maybe some pastel on top of that or some fire. It would be some really interesting combos mixing in the Black Pastel to give it some darkness and a little bit of contrast. So the genetic stripe, I'd say, when it comes to genetic stripe, I'd say that's similar to the champagne, where it's a really dominantly, it's a really visual dominant morph. You mix anything with genetic stripe and you pretty much end up with a genetic stripe that has a different color. And the funny thing is, you mix genetic stripe with certain morphs and it's all kind of variations of a theme where they all look like genetic stripes, but the genetic stripe is really powerful to bring out the color and the contrast of different morphs, and you mix it together with the black pastel, and let me tell you, this is probably one of the best genetic stripe combos that I've ever seen. It's a really intense snake. It almost looks like gold with a white kind of coming up the sides and a line coming down the top. This is, if you're into genetic stripes, I'd say black pastel genetic stripes is one of the best. So Mojave is kind of interesting. Mojave is in the blue-eyed leucistic. You mix two Mojaves together, you get an all-white snake with blue eyes, and I'd say Mojave is pretty much in everybody's collection. Really popular morph. You mix it with the black pastel, and take a look at this snake. This is really impressive. It almost looks it almost looks like a leopard combo. In some of the leopard combos, you actually have a stripe down the top like that, but there's no leopard in there. This is just the black pastel Mojave, and the more I look at all these, the more I really like the black pastel as probably the ultimate dark morph combo when it comes to mixing and making some really dark, impressive snakes. Here's a lesser. I actually have quite a few lessers, and the lesser is similar to butter. We actually looked at that before, but take a look at this. This is kind of interesting when you mix the black pastel with the lesser. It looks a little bit different than the black pastel butter we were looking at. Still a really impressive combo. I can't even believe the color and the contrast on some of these black pastel combos. It's just really blown me away. The more I look into it, the more it is just really amazing how it's working with some of these. So champagne, I'd say champagne's a pretty hard sell. Champagne pretty much just wipes out all the pattern, and you're left with pretty much a patternless snake of a different color. And this is what happens when you mix champagne with black pastel. You get pretty much, it's almost like a peach colored snake, which is kind of interesting. And sometimes when you mix certain things with champagne, you actually get kind of the white creeping up on here like a pseudo pied looking snake. And there's no pied in here, no hat pied. It's just sometimes the champagne mixed with certain morphs will actually give you kind of a pied look in the final result. So the Desert Ghost, I'm actually working a lot on the Desert Ghost, trying to work more stuff into the Desert Ghost in my collection. And look what happens when you mix Desert Ghost with the black pastel. This is really where the black comes out, and it looks like a really impressive combo. It's the Desert Ghost really increases the sharpness and the contrast of just about any morph. It's pretty amazing. You mix it with the black pastel, it looks really quite amazing just with the black pastel and the Desert Ghosts. So the banana is another one that it's really visually dominant when you mix it with other genes. And this is what happens when you mix the banana with the black pastel. I would say it's similar to the albino in the effect, where it's kind of reducing the color and bringing out some of the lighter parts of the snake. But the interesting thing is, it's not quite as bright and clean as the albino. You're getting kind of a dirty white in there. And a lot of times when you mix genes with the banana, you start losing the freckles, but in this case, it looks like you actually keep some of the freckling of the snake, which is really interesting. So the Lavender Albino, I'd say, is probably one of the best combos when you mix it with black pastel. I'd say it's similar to just the straight albino, but even more intense. Here's what happens when you mix the two together. This is an incredible snake. I haven't seen anything quite like this when you mix the two together. It almost looks comical the way the two genes interact together. It's hard to believe that's just black pastel and Lavender Albino. That is really impressive. So I wanted to show you some of the really high-end potential of the Black Pastel. This is actually the Super Black Pastel mixed with the Pie. This is the Panda Pine. And let me tell you, these, I would say the prices on these are really high. I'd say the demand is pretty low. There's not a lot of people looking for them, and the supply is really low. So there's just like a few select people working on the Panda Pine, and it really drives the price really high. This particular snake actually sold for $10,000. Pretty incredible for a single snake, the Panda Pine. And I think the Panda Pines are still really super expensive. Not a lot of them out there, but there are quite a few people that are just like a select small crowd that are actually looking for the Panda Pines. And since the supply is really low, the price is really high. So I actually came over here and looked at the total number of Black Pastels over on Morphe Market that have sold and that are for sale. And there's actually 3,795. So you can tell there's definitely a lot of Black Pastels. A lot of people are working with it, working it into a lot of their combos. And I want to show you just a couple more combos that are really intense, really brings out the ultimate potential of the Black Pastel and some higher end combos. So over here, this is a butter GHI Ghost, a 3-gene animal. And this is what happens when you actually take butter GHI Ghost and put Black Pastel on top of it. This is quite an amazing combo, adding the Black Pastel, and you get an almost silver snake. I would say this one would be pretty hard to hit. The Ghost is actually recessive, and then you're adding butter GHI Black Pastel on top of that. Pretty hard snake to make, but I thought it was interesting how it actually completely changed it almost unexpectedly as far as the direction it took this whole combo. Here's another one, the Super Orange Dream Yellow Belly Calico. And Super Orange Dream is really super bright. You add the yellow belly on top and it makes it even brighter, and then you add the calico. The calico usually just brings a little white in the sides. Can't really see it too much on this. You take the same exact combo, you add Black Pastel to it, and take a look at this. This one is gonna blow you away. It is really a dark morph, really keeps the pattern and the intensity, and really makes for a really impressive snake. This one actually sold for $2,000, which is pretty incredible for this snake. I would have actually thought that the snake would actually be a little bit more. It is a pretty impressive combo. I would say there's a lot of potential with Black Pastel. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Hiley's Pythons asks, once I start pairing up my ball pythons, do I keep offering food or do they just not eat? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I actually kept offering the females food week after week through the ball python breeding season. And you find out about halfway through, they pretty much all go off of food and they won't eat until after they lay eggs. And I kind of cheat in my collection here. As a matter of fact, I have an ultrasound and I can look inside the females and monitor the development of the eggs. And once the eggs get to a certain size and then the females are off of food, I pretty much know that I don't need to feed those females until after they lay a clutch of eggs. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.